Good afternoon, guys. So today I wanted to do a video about a movie. A friend of mine reminded me that I actually hadn't done uh, a film review yet. I'd done all books, and I was thinking that it might have had something to do with it being the pandemic, and it was just been really conducive to reading. So thanks, Neil. Um, but which is funny because movies are probably a bigger interest of mine than books even. So today I think I'm going to talk about Legend, the 1985 Ridley Scott film with Tom Cruise and Tim Curry, as well as Mia Sara there as the princess. And this is the Blu-ray Ultimate Edition, which has the director's cut, which was also the versions shown in the European release, as well as the American theatrical version. And there's some significant differences there, but I guess first I kind of wanted to talk about how, well, why I think Legend is interesting, and I think one of the main things is it's part of a legacy of Star Wars, basically. They changed they changed big budget movies forever, or certainly had a huge influence for a long time. But yeah, you notice, certainly after the late '70s, there's a big interest in like fantasy. Fantasy slash sci-fi, if you want to call it that, which I don't really consider Star Wars science fiction for several reasons. But anyway, I mean, I just thought of a few films and I wrote down the dates to be sure, looked them up. Like the same year as Star Wars, you had the animated Hobbit film, which I believe was aired on ABC TV, but it's still kind of thought of as a feature film of some kind, or at least it's feature length. Then in '78, you had the animated Lord of the Rings that Ralph Bakshi did. It was pretty influential. Then in '80, you had the Return of the King, the animated. I believe that might have been made for TV as well. Obviously based on Tolkien also. And then you have in '81, you had Disney's co-production, I believe, with Paramount or some large studio. Anyway, they did a co-production of this big budget fantasy film called Dragon Slayer. And again, that was 1981, and it was pretty dark too. And that definitely gets into that's definitely the genre that Legend is in, dark fantasy. But yeah, Dragon Slayer, I believe, actually this was before PG-13. I believe it had to be cut for a PG. I think maybe just because of some of the violence and the tone, and the scariness of it, and everything, for that time. And then in '84, you had the Neverending Story, from the director of Das Boot, which I believe that was, Wolfgang Petersen, I think, from Germany. So you had, even, European filmmaking got wise to kind of the Hollywood trends, and of course, they have their own fantasy film legacy. We can go into that in a later video. Also, that same year, 1984, David Lynch's Dune, which I mentioned in the previous video, and then the same year as Legend, you had Disney's animated The Black Cauldron, which was, I think, their first animated feature to be rated PG, and it was kind of a whole fiasco with that film. It's kind of interesting if you read about it. Of course, the bottom line is the main thing. So they ended up, they put a certain cut of it out, but some people weren't happy higher up, certainly, and I think some heads rolled at Disney because of that movie. But anyway, Legend is interesting because it's kind of like Ridley Scott's take on dark fantasy, and it's kind of like if you if you take the thick atmospheres of Blade Runner and apply that to a fantasy mode, it's kind of like what you get with Legend. I mean, in one sense, looking back on it, I was never super impressed with Legend. Like even when I eventually saw it on VHS when I was a teenager, I was kind of like, you know. But I mean, there's definitely a kind of a grandeur to it. Um, I do remember when it came out, there was such a big ad campaign, and people forget. See, I was born in the late '70s, and I remember as a kid looking forward to Sunday to look at the Sunday paper to see like what the big movies were that were coming out. You know, we didn't have cable or anything like that, and even a lot of people didn't have cable then. But there were always these, like, for big budget movies, there were lavish ads in the newspaper. You know, because that was where, you know, a lot of people looked to see what was playing. You know, for the internet, obviously, and everything. But I just remember with Legend, there was a big publicity push behind it. There was a big, beautiful ad for it in the paper. And I remember this was the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I believe there was also there's a big write up about it too, I think, and it seemed positive. I'm not sure I read the entire thing anyway, but yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny, like looking back at some of these, you know, 80s like genre movies, you know. Kind of remastered or you know, they try to achieve the highest technical quality they can for, you know, for fans, for a Blu-ray or a 4K release and whatnot. And it's just funny to to look back, and I mean, I'm glad that he hasn't, you know, done like the George Lucas treatment and, you know, inserted digital effects and everything, but it still is kind of strange to. I mean, it is 1985, but I mean, the photography is so slick and stylish. But then, to amidst that, you see some kind of cheesy. I mean, the makeup effects, for what they are, I mean, they're top of the line. They're good, but it's just kind of funny because, I mean, you have unicorns running around, and you can kind of tell that the horn is just like a little bit floppy, you know. And kind of the same thing with like Tim Curry's like Devil Darkness character, you know, like his horns, like you can tell those things are like made of styrofoam. Just they don't have any heft to them. I mean, just from the way that he moves, they look big and black and scary, but it's just something that you notice. But I still love it. Yeah. But it also, another thing that you kind of notice when you see it, you know, upgraded to this technology, and then especially when you think of movies like Blade Runner, which is just, you know, was probably still my favorite movie of all time, and that movie had so many different sets and so many different scenes, and a movie like this is almost, I mean, there's a few sets, but it's just not. It does look kind of cheap. I'm not going to lie. It is a little cheap. It's kind of like, oh, hey, we got these sets, you know, let's make everything look like really dirty and, you know, authentic, and have some smoke machines and stuff. And I don't know. I sound like I'm being mean, but I don't know. It's just, as somebody who's interested in how movies are made, it is kind of funny to kind of be able to see through the smoke and mirrors, sort of, especially nowadays that things are so different, and you just wonder if a movie was like this were to be made now, what it would be like. It kind of makes you wonder. But some other interesting things about this movie that I kind of realized reading about it. The screenplay is actually by William Hjortsberg. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Hjortsberg. It's, you know, Hjortberg. Who also wrote the screenplay for Angel Heart. Actually, I'm not sure if he wrote the screenplay, but I'm pretty sure he wrote the novel that the film is based on. And that's a really dark horror movie, sort of noir, horror noir with a satanic characters, basically. I like this movie. Like that's one thing that's interesting about the Tim Curry darkness villain is, um, I don't know. It's just kind of like confusing. I mean, I, I mean, I kind of get what they were going for here. It's almost kind of like Grendel slash Beowulf type thing. They're but because I mean you got all the fantasy tropes, of the princess. When actually in the theatrical version, the American one, they don't refer to her as the princess at all. They're just she's just some pretty girl who lives near the woods, and Jack is like the wood guy, and and they're friends and lovers or whatever. But anyway, so you have all these fantasy images, and the Lord of Darkness is like he's just very obvious like Satan figure. I mean he's got cloven hooves, and he's red, and he's got big horns, and goat like and whatnot. But yeah, it's just like it's just kind of funny that they went there, and it's just super dark. And I mean it's pretty typical of like these 80s fantasy movies, especially like the Black Cauldron for Disney. And I think it's no coincidence that those movies came out around the same time. But yeah, it's just funny. And the character, the Lord of Darkness, he seems to be able to take different forms, almost like Dracula, which is kind of interesting. Like you see him, he has this kind of like wraith form that's just like this bunch of like flowing black robes, and you can't really see the figure that's wearing them. And then of course, like I said, there's like the devil or satyr form, but also when he meets Lily, who's the princess, when she comes into his castle, he seduces her like in a female form, you would assume, or at least it seems so. And there's also some other differences between the director's cut and the theatrical version, which there's about 20 minutes difference. It's about 20 minutes longer, the director's cut. But one huge difference is the music. Tangerine Dream, the synth pop kind of atmospheric electronic outfit from, I believe they're American, but I'm not sure. Anyway, they did the music for the original theatrical release in America. And some of it is really gorgeous, and it really adds to some of the more, like a lyrical quality to some of the scenes that in the director's cut, they just don't have the same impact without the Tangerine Dream music. And I believe it's what's his name? Jerry Goldsmith did the alternate, the original, I guess, director's cut score and whatnot. But yeah, so I think I'm probably going to wrap this up before it gets before this video gets to be too long. But yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to add that I thought was kind of funny was like the set decoration, especially like in this movie does a good job of having like the contrasting like good and innocent looking place to like the Lord of Darkness's lair and castle and everything, which is like hell basically. But like the inside of this cottage, it looks like it was decorated by like a trip to like Wicks and Sticks at the mall back in the 80s. I mean, it's kind of like, how you would go to like the mall and there would be like stores that would say like ye old OLDE, that's that's kind of like, it feels like what they were going for here. But yeah, I mean, I guess back then it seemed really, kind of authentic or something, but it just seems kind of cheesy now. But no, in the end, I mean, if you're a fan of Ridley Scott and Blade Runner, I would definitely recommend Legend. If you're looking for like a really good movie, maybe not so much. It's just more kind of a fantasy. It's beautiful though. But yeah, if you're not so much into Ridley Scott, I wouldn't bother. All right, have a good one.